She bought the house behind the waterfall, the very one her late son had dreamed of. But when she started dusting the floor, she realized that someone had lived in the house after them. Look what she found behind the wall. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. The road that led north was narrow and quiet, bordered by tall trees whose roots pressed through the cracked pavement like veins of an old memory. Alice drove slowly, her hand steady on the wheel, though her heart beat in uneven rhythms. The air outside the car was damp and heavy, the kind of mountain mist that never truly lifts, and through it, she could see the blurred shimmer of water ahead. Lucy sat beside her, her head turned toward the window, tracing invisible lines on the fogged glass with her finger. They had been on the road for hours without saying much. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been spoken in the years that had passed since the accident. Silence had become their language, and grief their home. It had been 6 years since the night Alice's world collapsed. A collision on a narrow bridge, an overturned car, headlights in the rain. Her husband had died instantly, their young son soon after. She had survived only because she was at home with Lucy, who was barely old enough to understand what the word gone truly meant. In the years that followed, survival had become a ritual. Work, bills, sleep, repeat. The days stretched thin, filled with things that had to be done, not things she wanted to do. The apartment they lived in was small, dim, and perpetually cold. But it was safe, and safety had been all she could afford. Every now and then, though, something would remind her of her son's voice, an echo of laughter in a store aisle, the sight of a little boy running along a trail, or the rush of water falling from a great height. Her son had loved waterfalls. Once when they were hiking as a family, they found one hidden in a valley, its water descending in a silver veil that concealed a hollow space behind it. Through the mist, they had glimpsed a house built into the rock itself. The boy had stared at it for a long time and said, almost in a whisper, "If I could live anywhere, it would be there behind the water. No one could hear the world there." Alice had laughed then, thinking it was just a child's fancy. Now, years later, those words had taken root inside her and refused to leave. She had spent years working towards something she couldn't even name, a purpose, perhaps, or a promise she had made to a memory. By the time Lucy turned 12, Alice had saved enough to think about moving. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start again. She had left her old job at the bureau long ago, trading fieldwork and adrenaline for balance sheets and night shifts. Her life had narrowed into lines of numbers and fatigue. And then, one night, when sleep wouldn't come, she opened her laptop and began scrolling through property listings, looking for nothing in particular, just to fill the hours. That was when she saw it. The headline read, "Secluded mountain property, rare location, access behind natural waterfall." The picture stopped her breath. There it was, a stone house built half inside the cliff, its front hidden behind a cascade of falling water, its roof green with moss, its windows framed by mist. The price seemed absurdly low, and the description brief. Requires renovation. Remote access. Title clear. She should have been cautious. Years of training told her low prices always hid reasons. But something stronger than logic guided her that night. She clicked the contact number and left a message. The realtor called the next morning, his tone brisk and professional. He explained that the property had been vacant for years. The previous owners had abandoned it due to isolation and humidity problems. No one else had shown interest. It was, in his words, a hard sell. For Alice, it was a calling. Within a week, she arranged a visit. Lucy had been indifferent at first, shrugging at the idea of moving again. But when Alice told her where the house stood, behind a waterfall. Something flickered in the girl's eyes, a tiny light she hadn't seen in years. The day they arrived, the sky was overcast and low, the air filled with the scent of pine and rain. The road narrowed into gravel, then to dirt, and finally ended at a small wooden bridge that spanned a stream. Beyond it, the sound of falling water grew louder until it filled everything. The realtor's truck was waiting nearby, the man already out of it, holding a folder of papers. He smiled politely but said little, gesturing toward the narrow path that curved around a boulder. When they stepped through the veil of mist, the world seemed to change. The house appeared almost suddenly, a structure of stone and wood nestled against the cliff face, half concealed by the endless curtain of the waterfall. Sunlight broke through the clouds for a moment, catching on the water so that it shimmered like glass. Alice stopped walking. It was exactly as her son had described. The air around it was cool and clean, filled with the constant hum of water, a sound that at once comforted and unsettled her. Lucy's hand slipped into hers, small and trembling. Inside, the house smelled of age and damp earth. The wooden floor creaked, and the walls bore faint traces of where pictures once hung. In the main room, dust hung in the air like smoke, glowing faintly in the pale light that filtered through the waterfall. But the bones of the place were strong, thick beams of old cedar, a stone fireplace, narrow stairs leading to the upper floor. It wasn't large, but it had presence. It felt alive, in the way certain old things do when they've been waiting too long. Alice walked from room to room, imagining warmth, color, and laughter returning to these empty walls. The realtor spoke of property lines, utilities, and repairs, but she barely listened. She had already made her decision. By the time she signed the papers, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from pain. She was walking towards something. In the first week after the move, the rhythm of their lives began to change. Mornings were filled with the scent of wet stone and pine. Lucy helped her clean and sort through what remained, while old furniture, a few broken tools, and boxes of forgotten things. The sound of the waterfall became a constant companion, a heartbeat that pulsed through the walls. At night, when the mist rose around the windows, it felt as if the house floated between two worlds, the one they had left behind, and the one that still awaited them. Yet there was something about the place that resisted full peace. The cellar smelled faintly of gasoline, though there was no generator or stored fuel. In one of the upstairs rooms, the door hinges looked newly replaced, the metal too clean compared to the rusted latches elsewhere. A set of footprints led from the back door to the small storage closet beneath the stairs, faint but visible in the dust. Each discovery brought a flicker of unease, but Alice brushed it aside. After all, any old house held traces of those who had lived before. She refused to let suspicion spoil what she had built. Days turned into weeks. They began repainting the walls, scrubbing the stone floors, and replacing broken window panes. Lucy seemed lighter here. She spent hours by the water, sitting on the rocks and sketching, her hair clinging to her face from the mist. Sometimes she laughed, a sound Alice hadn't heard in years. In the evenings, they cooked simple meals, wrapped in blankets near the fire, and for brief moments, it felt as though the world outside had stopped. One afternoon, while organizing the closet near the kitchen, Alice decided to clear out an old shelving unit. It wobbled when she touched it, and behind it, she noticed a faint line in the wall, a seam where the wood didn't match the rest. Curiosity tugged at her. She found a screwdriver and pried gently at the panel. The board came loose with a reluctant creak. Behind it was darkness and the cold scent of metal. She reached in and pulled out a small, heavy box wrapped in duct tape. Its surface was clean, too clean, as if someone had hidden it recently. Her hands trembled as she set it on the floor. With a utility knife, she cut through the tape. Inside were several sealed plastic bags filled with a fine white powder, stacked neatly like bricks. Beneath them lay an old mobile phone with no SIM card and a small metal tag with her husband's name scratched into its surface. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The roar of the waterfall outside faded into a low, distant hum. She stared at the name until her vision blurred. For a long time, she couldn't move. The man she had buried, the man she had loved and mourned, had been a federal agent. Loyal, honest, devoted. He had died chasing a case she knew almost nothing about. To see his name here, in this box filled with something illegal and hidden, felt like a betrayal of memory itself. But then the training she had tried so hard to forget returned. Her pulse slowed. Her mind began to order the chaos. Someone had hidden this here deliberately. Someone had wanted her to find it, or perhaps to be found with it. The thought chilled her more than the mountain air. She sealed the box again, slid it back into its place, and replaced the panel. When she stepped away, her reflection in the dark window seemed like that of another woman entirely. One who had lived too long in silence and was now being called back to something she had once been. That night, Alice didn't sleep. She sat by the fire, the sound of the waterfall pressing against the windows like a restless tide. Lucy had gone to bed hours ago, her sketchbook still open beside her pillow. On the page was a drawing of the house, the water cascading before it, and two figures standing on the bridge, a mother and a child, hand in hand. The lines were soft and trembling, but in them was a fragile hope. Alice watched the flames die down to embers. The air was thick with questions she couldn't yet ask aloud. Somewhere within the rhythm of the falling water, she thought she heard her son's voice again, distant, faint, but certain. It wasn't comfort he offered this time. It was a warning. She rose, walked to the window, and looked out into the mist. The house behind the waterfall had seemed like a dream fulfilled, a promise kept to the dead. But dreams, she realized, could hide the most elaborate traps. As she stood there, the first real wind of the night passed through the gorge, bending the trees, sending the water into a sudden wild spray that rattled against the glass. It felt like the mountain itself was breathing, slowly, watchfully, alive. And in that sound, in that endless fall of water and echo of memory, Alice understood that the story of this house was far from over. The silence it offered was not peace. It was concealment. Something had been hidden here long before she arrived, and now, whether she wished it or not, she had become part of it. She turned from the window, her face set and pale in the dim light. Tomorrow she would begin searching, not as a grieving mother or a tired woman, but as what she had once been, an investigator. The house behind the waterfall had called her here for a reason, and the truth, whatever it was, waited beneath the sound of the falling water. Outside, the wind shifted again, and the mist closed around the walls like a secret. The night deepened, and the hum of the waterfall filled every corner, steady and relentless, as if the mountain itself was whispering, "Listen." The morning after the discovery passed in silence. Alice woke before dawn, unable to shake the image of the metal box from her mind. The sound of the waterfall pressed against the walls like a constant heartbeat, steady and unrelenting. She sat at the kitchen table, the faint smell of damp wood surrounding her, and stared at the mug in her hands until the coffee went cold. The house that had felt like a refuge only a day before now seemed to hold its breath, every creak and whisper charged with something unseen. When Lucy came down for breakfast, her mother forced a smile, speaking of paint colors and grocery runs, as if nothing had changed. The girl accepted it easily, unaware that something deep beneath their new beginning had already begun to unravel. By the time the sun reached the ridge, Alice had made her decision. She would not go to the police. Not yet. There were too many things that did not add up. The placement of the box, the phone, the handwriting carved into the metal, it was all too deliberate. Her instincts told her this was not a random discovery. Someone had planned it. Someone had wanted her here. The old rhythm of investigation returned to her like muscle memory. She had been trained to see patterns where others saw noise, and in this quiet mountain house, the noise was starting to form a shape. She retrieved her old laptop from the box of belongings she had packed away years ago and began searching. Databases, news archives, public records, tracing every name, every connection to her husband's final case. The details were buried deep beneath bureaucratic walls, but fragments surfaced. Confiscated shipments that vanished from evidence, reports filed and withdrawn. A name that appeared again and again, Thomas. The man had once been her husband's closest colleague, a partner he trusted more than anyone else. Thomas had resigned from the bureau a month before the accident, citing health issues, and had since built a private security firm that specialized in risk management. To anyone else, that might have seemed unrelated. To Alice, it was a red flag. When the email arrived that night, it caught her completely off guard. The subject line was blank, the sender's address untraceable. Inside, there was only one sentence. You shouldn't have gone back there. That house was never yours. For a long time, she sat staring at the screen, the glow of the monitor reflecting in her eyes. The words were precise, almost polite, but the threat beneath them was unmistakable. Her first instinct was to protect Lucy. Her second was to find out who had sent it. She opened a tracking program, rerouting through layers of old bureau protocols, but the source was cleanly erased. Whoever sent it knew how to hide. The days that followed moved with a strange rhythm. Lucy began to notice the change in her mother, the way she paused at sounds, the way she locked doors twice, the way her eyes flicked toward the windows at night. The girl didn't ask questions, though she sensed the unease that had settled in. Outside, the waterfall never stopped, its steady rush filling the silence that stretched between them. At times, Alice thought she could almost hear words within it, voices that had been trapped for years. It was Lucy who mentioned the noises first. One evening, she appeared in the kitchen, her face pale, saying she'd heard footsteps outside her window. Alice dismissed it gently, blaming the echo of the falls or an animal wandering near the rocks. But later, when she stepped out with a flashlight, the truth glimmered in the mud boot prints, deep and fresh, leading toward the side entrance. The tire marks on the gravel road were new too, narrow and clean, the kind made by a modern truck. She followed them until they vanished into the darkness of the forest. That night, sleep didn't come. She sat in the living room with the lights off, the waterfall a dull roar behind the walls. Her mind moved methodically through possibilities. The house had been empty for years, which meant the tracks were left recently. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting for something that had not yet happened. In the following days, Alice installed small cameras, 2 in the hallway, 1 near the entrance, 1 in the kitchen, pointing toward the closet where she had found the box. She set up motion detectors and reactivated an old bureau account to store the footage remotely. She didn't tell Lucy. The girl had enough shadows in her life. But the woman's own shadows were stirring, and she knew they wouldn't rest until she confronted them. The sense of being watched grew stronger. At times, she caught the glint of metal near the trees, as though sunlight had flashed across binoculars or a lens. A drone once passed low overhead, its faint hum quickly lost in the roar of the water. She told herself it was paranoia, but even paranoia had logic. The box had been planted for a reason, and the email had confirmed it. Whoever was behind this hadn't expected her to find it so soon. Late one evening, as the last light faded from the valley, Alice climbed to the attic, searching through the few old boxes that had come with the house. Most contained broken tools, moth-eaten linens, or discarded junk. But one box, wedged behind the rafters, was marked with her husband's initials. Inside were case notes, printouts of maps, and a small flash drive sealed in plastic. Her breath caught. The drive contained a recording and audio log. She plugged it in, and his voice filled the silence. "If you're hearing this," the recording began, "then something went wrong. There are people inside the Bureau who can't be trusted. The shipments, the evidence, none of it is being destroyed. They're hiding it. The last drop point was supposed to be secure, but I think they're using the Waterfall property. If I can't get back, find them. Don't let them bury this." The file ended abruptly. Alice sat still, her hands trembling. The Waterfall property. He had known. He had been there. Perhaps he had even hidden something of his own before he died. A cold realization formed in her mind. His death had not been an accident. The next morning, she contacted an old colleague, someone who still worked in the Bureau, someone she trusted. She used a secure channel and spoke carefully, omitting names. The reply came quickly but carried warning. "You're dealing with something active," her friend wrote. "The people involved are dangerous. Don't approach them. Send me whatever you have." Alice hesitated. The instinct to rely on no one but herself was stronger than old loyalties. Still, she uploaded the images of the box, the transcript of the email, and the audio file. She didn't mention her exact location. Days stretched on. She worked quietly, cleaning, repairing, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Lucy began to sleep better again, thinking the tension had passed. But each night, Alice checked the cameras, her pulse tightening as she watched the flickers of movement in the dark. The same shadow would appear by the trees, pause near the water, and then vanish. She could almost sense their patience. Whoever they were waiting for the right moment to step inside. Her friend finally responded. The message was brief. "The man you suspect, Thomas, is under investigation, but he's protected. He left the Bureau with friends in high places. Be careful. If he learns what you have, he won't hesitate." The words confirmed what she already knew. The only way to protect herself and Lucy was to finish what her husband had started. She planned each step in silence, studying the house as though it were a crime scene. The storage closet, the cellar, the narrow passage that led toward the rock wall, all potential entry points. She cleaned the hidden space again, placing the box back exactly as she'd found it. This time, she planted a device inside a small trigger that would activate audio and video recording the moment the seal was broken. The next few days were a blur of waiting. The sound of the waterfall became oppressive, louder than ever. Rain came down the mountainside in waves, swelling the river, turning the air to mist. Lucy complained that she couldn't sleep because the water was too loud. Alice simply told her it was the mountain breathing, that it was safe here, though even as she said it, she felt the lie burning in her throat. On the third night, she heard it, a faint creak near the back door. She froze, the flashlight trembling in her grip. A silhouette passed across the window for a split second, before vanishing into the dark. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. Whoever it was, they were closer now. The next morning, she drove Lucy into town under the pretense of errands. She left her at a friend's house, promising to return by evening. When she came back, the road up the hill was muddy with fresh tire tracks again. This time she photographed them carefully. They matched the same narrow tread pattern as before. The house felt heavier when she entered, as if it had absorbed what had passed through it. She checked every room. No one was there. But on the kitchen table lay a single piece of paper, The handwriting was jagged and rushed. "Stop digging." The message confirmed everything. Someone had been inside. Someone had access. She locked the doors, set every alarm, and packed a small bag with essentials. But before she left, she walked into the main room and looked around. The stone walls, the beams, the faint reflection of the water shimmering across the windows. This had been her son's dream, her refuge, her second chance. She could not abandon it. If she left now, the truth would die here, buried under moss and water just like before. As evening fell, the mist thickened around the house, muffling sound. The cameras blinked red in the dim light. Alice stood at the window and watched the bridge, waiting for movement. Somewhere deep inside, fear had turned to resolve. She knew now that the enemy was not just outside, it was within the past itself. Every secret, every lie that had stolen her husband's life was converging here, in this quiet place behind the waterfall. When night came, she set her plan in motion. The recording device in the closet was armed. The cameras were online, streaming directly to the bureau cloud through encrypted channels. She turned off the lights and sat near the window, her silhouette hidden against the darkness. The roar of the water filled her ears, steady, almost hypnotic. Hours passed. Then came the faint sound of footsteps on gravel. Two figures emerged from the shadows, one tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the precision of someone trained, the other smaller, cautious, glancing over his shoulder. Even from a distance, Alice recognized the gait of the first man, Thomas. Her chest tightened, but she stayed still. She watched as they moved toward the entrance, flashlights cutting through the mist. When the door opened, the motion sensor triggered. The cameras blinked to life. Every breath, every whisper was recorded. The men stepped inside, unaware they were being observed. One of them went straight to the closet. They knew exactly where to look. Alice waited in the dark, her mind cold and focused. The trap was set. The moment they opened that box, the entire story would begin to unravel. Not just the lies buried in her husband's name, but the corruption that had spread far beyond it. Outside, the waterfall thundered endlessly, its sound covering every movement inside the house. For years, it had hidden secrets beneath its veil of water. Now, it would witness their unveiling. And as Alice watched the men move through the house, unaware of the silent eyes surrounding them, she realized something else. The fear that had followed her here was no longer in control. It had become something sharper, steadier, a will to fight. The night stretched long, filled with the pulse of water and the faint echo of approaching justice. The house that had once been her son's dream had turned into a stage for truth. And soon, when the dawn came, it would no longer belong to those who used it to hide. It would belong to her, and to the memory of the man who had died, trying to expose the very men now trapped within its walls. She waited, breath held, as one of them lifted the lid of the box. The soft click of metal echoed through the room, followed by the faint sound of recording devices coming to life. Somewhere in the darkness, Alice allowed herself a single, steady breath. The trap was sprung. The next chapter of the story was already beginning to write itself. The sound of the waterfall deepened as night settled around the valley, its endless rhythm masking the movements within the house. Alice remained in the darkness, the dim light from her monitors casting faint reflections on the walls. On one of the screens, two figures moved through the hallway, their flashlights sweeping over the dust and broken furniture. The air inside the room felt heavy, every heartbeat echoing with the certainty that the moment she had prepared for had finally arrived. She sat perfectly still, her hand hovering over the control key that would transmit everything to the Bureau's secure servers. For the first time since she had bought the house, she was no longer a guest in it. She was its guardian. Thomas moved like a man who knew the space well, confident, deliberate. He gave quick instructions to the man behind him, the realtor who had sold her the property. Their voices, faint but clear through the microphone, were all she needed to hear. They mentioned the closet, the shipment, the mistake of letting her move in so soon. Her pulse steadied, and she forced herself to breathe evenly. Every word they spoke added weight to the truth she had been chasing. In the monitor's flickering light, she watched them approach the hidden wall. The smaller man knelt and began to pry the wooden panel loose. The moment the box appeared, the tiny signal light blinked green, transmitting the feed to the cloud. She didn't move, not even when the men began to speak her husband's name. The way Thomas said it, mocking, almost pitying, made something inside her twist. He spoke of him as a fool, a man who had believed too much in justice, who had tried to stop them and paid the price for it. The realtor said something about her, about how it was easier than expected to get her there, how the price drop had done the work for them. Thomas laughed softly, saying the Bureau would never believe her if the drugs were found again. That was the plan, then, to wait until she left, plant the evidence, and let the discovery destroy what was left of her husband's name. The sound of that laughter snapped something within her. Alice stood slowly, the cold weight of her phone in her palm. Her thumb pressed the emergency key. Within seconds, the signal reached the Bureau. She spoke softly into the receiver, giving her location and code phrase, the one she had never thought she'd use again. Operation Echo. Confirm extraction. The line clicked once, then silence. Outside, through the constant roar of the waterfall, she heard another sound, the distant rumble of engines climbing the mountain road. Back inside, Thomas had realized something was wrong. The smaller man had noticed the blinking light inside the box. A shout, then the crash of footsteps. They knew. Alice stepped away from the monitor and crossed to the far side of the room. She wasn't afraid anymore, only resolute. Years of training had honed her instincts to move without hesitation, and now they guided her hands as she shut off the lights, locked the doors, and slipped into the shadows. The front door slammed open. Heavy boots struck the floorboards. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, beams slicing across the walls. She could hear their breathing, fast, harsh, angry. Thomas barked orders, cursing under his breath. "She knows," he said. "Find her." Alice backed toward the narrow passageway that led to the cellar. The air was colder here, the sound of the waterfall above them vibrating through the rock. She could see the mist drifting through a small crack in the stone wall, where water seeped down from the cliff. She had discovered the passage weeks ago, an old drainage tunnel carved decades earlier. It led beneath the house, out to the base of the falls. When she first found it, she thought of sealing it off, but something had stopped her. Now she understood why. As she descended, she heard the men moving above her. The house groaned under their weight. Then came the faint buzz of her phone. A message. It was her bureau contact. "Units inbound. 10 minutes." She typed a single word in reply. "Ready." Thomas's voice echoed down the stairs. He was calling her name now, no longer calm, his composure cracking. He spoke of her husband again, how he had begged for mercy, how his death had been unavoidable. Alice paused halfway down the steps, her hand tightening on the railing. It was a lie, of course, but hearing it aloud filled her with a cold fury. She wanted him to hear her voice, but not yet. Not until it was over. The tunnel was narrow and slick with moisture. She crouched low, moving quickly through the dark, her flashlight beam faint against the wet stone. The roar of the waterfall grew louder as she neared the exit. Through a thin slit of light, she could see the outline of the rocks outside, the mist swirling like smoke. She emerged onto a narrow ledge just as the first sirens pierced the night. From her vantage point, she could see the entire front of the house, its roof glistening under the rain. 2 black vehicles were approaching along the mountain path, headlights cutting through the fog. Thomas must have seen them too, because shouting erupted inside. One of the lights in the upper window flickered wildly, then went dark. Moments later, a gunshot cracked through the roar of water. The sound bounced across the valley. Another followed, then a third. She crouched low, heart hammering, waiting. The Bureau vehicles stopped in the clearing, and men poured out, moving fast and precise, spreading into formation. Within minutes, the shouts from the house were drowned out by commands and movement. The waterfall's mist swallowed everything in a silver haze. When it was over, dawn was breaking. The first light crept through the mist, turning the spray into gold. Alice stood on the ledge, her body trembling with exhaustion. The house looked different now, no longer haunted, no longer secret. Smoke rose from a broken window, curling upward into the pale sky. An agent called out to her from below, his voice faint through the roar. She nodded and began her slow climb down. Inside, the aftermath was quiet. The floor was littered with shards of glass and footprints. Thomas was led out in handcuffs, his face pale, the confidence gone from his eyes. He glanced at her once, a look not of anger but disbelief, as though he couldn't understand how she had undone what he had built. The realtor followed, head bowed. The agents worked in silence, gathering evidence, cataloging every fragment of the operation that had begun years earlier and ended here, behind a wall of water. When Alice stepped back into the main room, she paused beside the empty space where the box had been. The panel still hung loose, the wood damp and splintered. For a moment she imagined her husband standing there, smiling in quiet relief. The pain that had driven her for years softened into something else, not peace, but purpose. Over the next few weeks, the mountain returned to its stillness. Reporters came and went, curious about the story of the Waterfall case, but she avoided them all. The Bureau sent her a letter of gratitude, though she never read past the first paragraph. She didn't need recognition. What mattered had already been done. Her husband's name was cleared, and the men responsible for his death would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Spring came early that year. The ice melted from the rocks, and the path to the waterfall filled with flowers. Lucy returned from her aunt's house, and together they began to rebuild. They repaired the broken windows, repainted the walls, and cleared the debris that the investigation had left behind. Each day, the house grew warmer, brighter, more alive. The constant thunder of the water no longer sounded like warning or grief. It had become a rhythm of renewal, a steady pulse that marked the passing of days. On the morning when the final repairs were finished, Alice stood on the bridge with Lucy beside her. The mist sparkled around them, and for the first time in years, the girl was smiling. She asked if they would stay here forever, and Alice answered softly that they would stay as long as the house kept them safe. Behind them, the door stood open, sunlight spilling through the windows, touching the walls that had once hidden darkness and now held only light. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, listening to the rush of water beyond the glass. Sometimes Lucy drew pictures again of trees, mountains, and the bridge where the mist never faded. Alice kept one of those drawings on the mantel. It showed the house as it looked now, surrounded by light, the waterfall glowing behind it. In the corner, Lucy had written a single sentence: "Where the water falls, the pain disappears." Months later, Alice began to think about what to do with the place. It was too large for just the two of them, too full of memories that deserved to become more than ghosts. She reached out to her former colleagues and proposed an idea: a retreat for the families of agents who had died in the line of duty. A place where they could rest, away from the noise of the world surrounded by the sound of water that never stopped. The Bureau agreed to fund it, calling it the Haven. When the first families arrived that autumn, the air was cool and clear. Alice greeted them at the bridge, showing them the rooms that once held shadows and now offered quiet. Children played near the rocks, laughing as the spray caught the sunlight. Lucy helped them plant trees along the path, each one dedicated to a fallen name. The garden grew quickly, roots gripping the soil as though they had always belonged there. Sometimes, late at night, when everyone was asleep and the house was still, Alice would walk to the window and look out at the falls. The moonlight touched the surface of the water, turning it silver and white. She would think of her son, of the day he had stood before a waterfall and dreamed of a home where the world could not intrude. He had been right, in a way. Behind the water, the noise of grief had finally faded, replaced by something stronger than silence, a promise that even in loss, life could begin again. The house behind the waterfall had held lies once, secrets buried under years of deceit. But now it held laughter, warmth, and the echo of those who had been saved by its second chance. It no longer hid anything. The sound of the water that had once concealed crimes now washed through open windows, clean and bright, filling every room with life. On the wooden gate at the entrance, Alice placed a plaque engraved with simple words. They were her son's words, remembered from that long-ago day by the river. Where the water hums, the pain cannot be heard. Each time the wind shifted and the mist rose over the bridge, she imagined his voice in it, not calling for her, but watching quietly, content. The story of the house, like the water itself, would never truly end. It would keep flowing, over stone and memory, through seasons and generations, carrying with it the truth she had fought to uncover and the peace she had finally earned. And in that endless sound, that soft thunder rolling down the cliffs, the past was forgiven, the future waiting, and the house, once a place of deception, stood at last in its rightful form, a sanctuary cleansed by time and the relentless purity of falling water. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. Take a moment to watch the next video waiting for you right now. There are so many more stories to discover. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Some stories are too powerful to keep to yourself.